Welcome to the Smart Nonsense Podcast, where we talk about entrepreneurship, self-development, and challenging norms. Today, it is episode 44, and we are diving deep again with our friend, Avthar Sewrathan. If you missed the first conversation with Avthar, go to episode 37, because there we talk about self-mastery, we talk about business automations, and later, a cool business idea that we all stumble upon. Here, we are diving deep on Avthar's background. We talk about that for the first half, about his experiences in South Africa, the educational system there, then later in Costa Rica, and finally in Princeton, where he studied computer science. We also talk about where kids are going wrong nowadays, and even adults, in terms of finding the true path for them in life, how to keep an internal scorecard for your accomplishments and your route to success, and finally, how we might transform the educational system as a whole. So, I'm excited for you to listen. If you want to connect to Avthar, you can find him on his website, avthar.com, avthar.com, or on Twitter at avthars. I'm excited for you to listen. Jump right into it. The first half, again, is about Avthar. The second half, we get more into broader educational questioning. I'm excited for you. All right. This is episode 44 with Avthar Sewrathan. So, Avthar, we had episode 37, which is my dad's favorite episode so far. And
nice.
Not trying to
Which was episode 37? Which one was that?
Oh, well, the only one we released. We actually
that's the one
twice.
that we did. Okay, I thought you were talking about another episode.
Yeah, just say a random episode.
Oh, no, I thought this one that you did yesterday. You're like, oh, okay.
No, we're in the 40s now,
like,
baby.
all right.
Yeah, nice.
Proud of your dad.
No, it's cool.
So,
yeah.
It's more related to you because he loved the insights that came out of that podcast facilitated by you. So we need to do the episode that's long overdue. Where you come from, how you just got into this whole world of self-mastery and seem to be doing well in it. I want to start from the ground up, but is there anything, Belky, that you've had on your mind?
Well, related to that, Avthar, when we met, now, holy crap, almost 10 years ago. We can talk about how that happened, but I remember we were all like 13 years old at the time, 15 years old.
But we were like 17. Right. I don't know how old you were. You were probably like a year younger than me. I was
16, 15.
Yeah, 16. It's like 17, 18 at the time. We were like,
But what was so curious was you were Mr. Self-Development then.
That's true, actually, yeah.
Yeah. I just remember you walking around with your laptop, like you were walking around like this, and you just had like this aura, and you were like, "Go watch this TED Talk. Go watch this TED Talk. Go watch my TED Talk." And where did that come from? Like, so you were in this world at age, like you said, 17. I guess, Dylan, you were about 18 when you first picked up 4-Hour Workweek. No.
Oh yeah.
So Avthar, how did it start? How did this happen?
No, I think that's a good place to start. For me, I think the turning point was when I went to this international school, UWC, Costa Rica. So picture this, I'm a kid from South Africa, grew up in post-apartheid South Africa. So basically the country is still trying to figure out, how do you transition away from this dictatorship that we've been under essentially. And there's a lot of, like, things aren't perfect, basically. It's not like the biggest struggles weren't trying to like fit in school and stuff, but at that time it was just normal. Like my childhood was normal. We didn't think anything of it, and then so growing up in South Africa, then I when I was 17 I moved across the world to go and live and study in Costa Rica, and I think that was the main catalyst to me getting into self-development and trying to understand how can you like master yourself, because I think when you're in an environment where at such a young age, you're completely on your own and you have to decide, how do you want to live your life, essentially, that independence is kind of thrust upon you. I think a lot of, Americans experience this when they go to college. And so it happened a little earlier in my life. And I think that period of time where you don't have anyone telling you what to do. You basically in charge of everything. You're
coming from, sorry to cut you off, but an all boys school in South Africa, and they're just, we're going to unleash you in a country where you don't speak the language with a bunch of other international students. Girls, guys, I can't imagine what's going through your head. You're like, this is crazy freedom.
And the thing about like the school that I went to in South Africa, I'm not sure if you guys have these in the US, but they're kind of like remnants of like the British schooling system, where it's like everyone's wearing a uniform. There's a lot of strict rules. There's like a very set hierarchy among the students. So for example, like when I was in grade 8, you had to go and like do chores and do like run errands for the people who were in grade 12, who were the seniors. And it was like worse if you were in the boarding school. So I was just a day scholar. I used to travel to school every day. But if you're in the boarding school, then you'll have to like, clean their room, or like it's basically like a means of, getting respect and moving up the ladder. So to go from that very like structured hierarchical environment to UWC, which is very much like, oh guys, education can save the world, and like let's all just respect each other, and like it's very like new agey and kumbaya around the campfire kind of stuff. But I think that whole experience just taught me that, look, like I loved reading at a young age as well. And so at that time, whatever issues I would have, I would turn to books or to resources to try and like solve that, because that was like the only thing that I knew. It's like, okay, I have a problem, let's try and find out something about how you can solve it. And I think that year, at my first year when I was in Costa Rica, so I came there when I was 17, didn't speak any Spanish, sort of trying to find myself and where I am in the world and my place in the world. That year was like super transformative to me. I managed to get my health in check, lost like, I think it was like 50 pounds or so.
Yeah, that was the other thing.
So that was like, and so when I met Henry, it was at the end of this first year of like immense transformation and basically like just finding a lot of self-esteem and confidence in myself and my abilities and basically assuredness in the fact that like I can be effective in the world, and I can like execute without relying, basically self-reliability. That's the word I would use. And so obviously, cool. and so when I met you, I think I was like at the end of that phase. So it looks like, this person has it all put together.
You were so wise. I remember there were a few people in our cohort that were like getting in trouble for sneaking alcohol in, to, like, the different things. And Avthar's just like, he's like, I can't even explain it. You had your shit together. That's what it was. And it was,
that's true.
It shone so bright.
I appreciate that though, man. Thank you. I must say, like, my first impression of Henry, I was like, at first I was kind of jealous, because like at that time he had like this vitamin company, and I was like, damn, this guy is so young and he already has a company and it's like got this cool social mission. So I think it goes both ways, right?
Enron of a company right there. You had to get out of that. That was
so we should. I sent Dylan this morning. He asked me about a week ago he wanted to see the Shark Tank video, and I couldn't find it. It was on some older computer, but I found it this morning, unlisted on YouTube. So that'll surface somewhere. But Avthar, we should talk about how we ended up, or basically what the African Leadership Academy was, because that was, for me, their curriculum on entrepreneurial leadership was like such a kick in the butt. So you had figured out
a lot of the lessons, exactly. A lot of like the lessons that we learned there was actually really, really good. A lot of the things actually stayed with me until this day. In fact, I should actually try and dig up my old, I still have the leadership journal, like the binder that they had, and we would reflect in things. Coincidentally, I actually got to know Veda pretty well. He's also a Princeton alum, and so we've met subsequently to the end of that camp. That was
actually, he would be an awesome person to talk to on here. But
he actually has his own podcast now, so I can introduce you guys.
That would be super cool. Well, I talked with him, so I should just do do that. I saw him in San Francisco not too long ago. But now this is the Avthar Henry Veda show. Veda was the
he was basically like the head like facilitator in the camp,
and he also kind of came up with the curriculum. He was like in on the founding table of the African Leadership Academy. So Dylan, we met there. It was 2013, and it was this awesome summer course on entrepreneurial leadership. And it was, at the time, they were teaching a lot of kind of unconventional things.
Exactly.
They were ahead
especially
of the curve.
for kids at like that young age. A lot of it was about, so like the thesis of that camp was, I think it was called a Global Scholars Program. Mm-hmm. So you bring in both students from Africa. So I was one of the African students, even though I was in Costa Rica when I applied. So you have a portion of students who are from Africa, and some students who are actually students at the school African Leadership Academy. And then you have these other students from some are Americans and some are from like the UK and other countries. We even had one guy from China as well. He came like halfway late.
Yeah,
So there's
I
people
remember.
from all over the world supposed to come there. And the idea is to try and equip them with some entrepreneurship and leadership skills, and also teach them about like Africa and the potential that entrepreneurship has to transform the African continent. And I think that was my takeaway, because at that time, one of the things that I realized when I was at UWC is that like I really love South Africa, and the other African students and I became very close. There was only about 5 of us or so. It was a very about 5, 7, basically like a handful of us, and we got really tight. And so naturally, this whole idea of like, look, a lot of African countries share similar problems, weak institutions, weak leadership, corruption. And so is it possible to train a set of young people? And their hypothesis is that leadership is a thing that's missing. And so if you have good leadership, then that will actually create stronger institutions and decrease corruption and stuff like that. And so that was the premise of this whole school, and this whole summer camp was to basically teach that, but like at a micro level in the 6 weeks or 8 weeks.
And the problem too, Avthar, was you could teach leadership on the continent, right? And because all of the top students from the continent would end up coming to the States to go to whatever institutions, and they would go to Ivy League schools here, and then they would stay here, right? It was that idea of brain drain. And so the African leadership's position is, okay, if you come here for boarding school for 2 years, it's all those things Avthar talked about, but also if you go away for school, you have to come back and serve and build organizations on the African continent for like I think 10 years. Yeah, for 10 years.
Yeah, like after, I think 10 years after you graduate, within that time, you have to dedicate like a period of your working career.
What's interesting
I think it's part of the scholarship that they get.
Exactly, right. The bummer is I know a few people who have kind of broken that contract and elected to pay.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah,
okay.
And stay in the States. And so I don't know how well it's working. We should talk to Beta, but that's
a whole topic for another day.
Yeah,
one of my friends who was one of the first groups of students at the school was just talking a little bit about, I think once you get out of it, you kind of see through the matrix and you're like, well, I think that the whole vision and the goal is good, but there are some things that might leave you a bit disenchanted. And that whole returning policy is a controversial topic, at least among the students.
It's cool. Like, I think few people get into this like heavy entrepreneurship, going out and exploring new worlds at such a young age. So that's why it's amazing that you two could do that. For Avthar, was that like your parents kind of wanted you to do this, or did you hear about, say, United World College or whatever? Like, how did you stumble into these worlds?
Yeah. That's a very good question, actually. My parents haven't forced me to do anything in life. I think it's very like, when I think back at it, my parents have been very much letting me pick the things that I'm interested in. And then as I've picked them, they've been just super supportive of it. And so the story of how I came across UWC and even ALA is that when I was younger, I was super interested in maths and science, and so I got selected to go for these like science Olympiads. So I represented South Africa at International Science Olympiad in Nigeria when I was like 15, I think. And then similarly, I represented South Africa again at this International Physics Olympiad when I was 17. And so those experiences, especially the first one when I was in Nigeria, was so like formative to me, because at that time it was my first exposure to people from different countries in the world. And we're all at an age where, when you're 15, you're still like nice. You're still like a kid in the sense that like, you haven't like fully formed your ideas of the world, but you have enough understanding of your own culture and your own country that you can share that with other people. So you're receptive, but you also have something to bring. And that whole experience was really life-changing for me. I've made friends that I still keep in touch with today. I think when you, as a kid, especially like looking at the context that we were coming from, You take all these like nerdy kids who are like the best in maths and science at their school, and you bring them all together. And initially in their own countries, they think like, we're like the only people, no one really understands us. And then you come together and you're like, wow, everyone here actually likes this stuff. Everyone is cool. And so I wanted to be in that environment. So that was just like, I think it was like 2 weeks that the Olympiad was. I wanted to be in that environment for like longer. I just wanted to go back and wanted to keep having that exposure to people from different countries in the world and learning. Because I think like you hear a lot about different countries. So like everyone has heard of, this is what's happening in Brazil, this is what's happening in Indonesia. But once you meet someone from that country, it really humanizes what's going on there. And so I think that kind of like element of building empathy such that it's not just like things that you're reading in the news, but there's actually people that you can associate with things. That was super powerful for me. And then the other thing was that like I just think people, that was like the first time that I realized that like the story that I have is interesting. A lot of people were fascinated by the idea that I am South African Indian, even though like South Africa is a predominantly Black country. A lot of the we had people on a team that were Indian, we had white people, Black people, and so it was like a microcosm of like the racial mix-up of South Africa. And people were kind of confused at that because they don't necessarily see that in the things that they're watching on TV or things that they're reading about. And so I like that, and I kind of like wanted to share more about what life is like, and more about my life and the things that I'm interested in. And so basically, like I got very lucky. I was researching around for what other organizations have like an international mission and things like that. And one day, the the single most like life-changing thing in my life kind of happened by accident, where one day I was just in school in South Africa. I went to a public high school, and someone had went to UWC that was like a year above me or 2 years above me, and he just happened to like come and speak to my particular English class that day. It was only one class in the whole school. The school has like thousands of like more than 1,000 kids in it, 1,000 guys, and he just happened to speak to my English class that day. He didn't speak to any of the other classes, and he basically said, "Yeah, I went to the school." He went to the school in Canada, and he basically talked about how life-changing it was. It was people from different countries, and you learn this great curriculum called IB, and then he's thinking about going to university in the US. And I was like, damn, this sounds like this thing that I was looking for. It's like ideally positioned. And it so happened that the ethos of UWC was all about international understanding, sharing from your culture, but also like being a representative of your country. And at that time, I was super into debating and public speaking, and so I was very like politically aware of what was going on in South Africa, and I was able to articulate what my opinions about these things are at a level that was perhaps unusual for someone that was like 16 at the time. That mainly because I was debating, and so you learn all these arguments, you learn how to stand up and speak in front of people. And so what actually happened, that whole story, is that I went for I applied like before the applications kind of open. And so like I put my application, I sent it in, and they're like, sorry, like you have to wait until next year. And so anyway, I managed to go through that whole application process. What's actually funny is that I didn't actually finish the whole thing. So what happens is that you apply, and then if they think that you can kind of handle the whole experience, they take you to like a regional selection. You can think of this kind of like in your state. So each province in South Africa has their group of like 10 kids or so, and they come and they interview you, and you talk among the other kids. And it's kind of trying to see, can you, are you able to like socially adapt to uncomfortable situations, but also like how well can you hold your own in a foreign environment? Because, in addition to going to places that you have, that you don't speak the language, can you make friends? Are you like sociable? Can you survive socially in that environment is another thing. And so I just went through this first part. What then happens is you take all the people who are the winners of their regional groups, and then you take them to like the national stage. And so you have like a camp, and then they select the people that get the scholarships. Now, what happened to me is that I actually didn't go through the second phase. I just went to the first phase, and then I was I had to go to this debating tournament. So it was one of my first international tournaments. It was in Slovakia at the time. And so at the time that this thing happened, they called me and they're like, oh, can you come to Johannesburg this weekend? So I live in this place called Pietermaritzburg. It's like 6 hours away from Johannesburg. Can you come to Johannesburg this weekend? We need you to come for this national selection. So I was super happy. But then also like I was leaving the next day to go to this debating tournament. And so I was kind of sad at that point because I was like, this is a thing that like, it's really going to change my life. But at the same time, I already committed to this this tournament. I was going to represent South Africa there. And this is kind of where I realized that like, Tim Ferriss has this phrase that like reality is negotiable. The rules that you see that like people are writing down and, the kinds of like things that you're supposed to abide by, these are all suggestions. These are not rules. These are suggestions. And you can, if you're willing to question that and if you're willing to ask more than often or not, reality can bend to your will. And so this basically what happened was that I kind of get this from my mother as well. My mother is probably one of the most proactive people that I know. Super organizer, super like planning things, and like she's basically like she'll be a great like chief operations officer. Like in my ideal company, amazing at like organizing things. And so she was like, why don't you send them an email and say, look, you representing South Africa at this debate thing. It's not like you're, sitting at home and like you don't want to come. And so eventually they managed to reschedule it such that the day after the day that I landed back in South Africa after this debate tournament, the people who are like on the committee met me in this hotel. So I had to get from the airport to this like random hotel in Johannesburg. Keep in mind, I don't live in the city, so I don't know where anything is. So I made my way to this hotel and went and met these people. And fortunately, I done like well at the tournament. I think I came second or something like that, like individually, and we'd reached the final. So we did pretty well. And so I was in like a talkative mood and a happy mood. I was kind of nervous because like we were just in like a hotel conference room. It was kind of like all the atmosphere and thing had been taken out, and it was just me and these like three people. I think they were probably in business or something like that. And then fortunately, that's how I got in. And so a lot of it is basically luck. Most of the good things that have happened in my life are lucky. But I think
Not
also
so much so.
But also it shows you that like when opportunities come, I was like well prepared for that particular opportunity. And I think this is where it's like there's a phrase that Naval has, which is like you got to find who and what needs you the most in the world. And I think that like a lot of the time people want things, but like what I wanted at that age in life, like when I went to the Science Olympiad, was to go and study at Cambridge or Oxford, because I felt like that was what smart people did at that time. But my particular route to getting and my way of doing things in life, I've never done it the traditional way of like, oh, you do well in school and then you go to university. I've always done like the kind of like side road way, and UWC was like a good example of that, where I actually had to leave South Africa and then go and do 2 years at this school, and then I ended up in university. And so it was always like, life doesn't. You can have these plans and you can have these like things that you want to achieve, but these kind of serendipitous opportunities are sometimes the best ways to actually achieve those overall goals that you have. Anyway, so that's kind of like how I found
holy
it.
Cow. But I think the overarching point there that like, and we've talked about this. Wow, I'm just pointing things. We've talked about this like
you can point this way.
Formalities, right? Formalities don't have to be so. You can bend reality. You can push back and question things that have to be so.
Yeah.
And I think
Ramit is go ahead.
Yeah, when you said that all these things were lucky, that they kind of fell in place for you, I don't think is true. I think what you said, well, you emailed them back saying, look, I can't do this, but is there any way we can do it, in a hotel in Johannesburg on my way home from this thing? And they're like, yeah. I think that's the difference. And pushing back on formalities is important. What you got, Dylan?
I was just talking last night. We had like an hour and a half phone call with a friend from the company, the YouTuber I used to work for. And we're talking about how everyone, they have this, what is it? It's a character that's like, I forget the acronym, but it's like just a character in a video game that just runs off their script, nothing else. And just like so many people in the world, they're just running off these scripts of like, hey, how are you doing today? And like, or this is how, I don't know, you go to school, like do this certain thing, and they just go by the formula, go by the script, and then you come and pierce that with like some casual informality or just whatever. And I love that mentality. Maybe it's not super connected to what we're talking about, but I think there is so much of just reality that you realize you can change and bend. You can go to a different side of the world and explore it with these kids or whatever. And you end up going then to Princeton. You kind of take all these learnings, and I guess you have a whole different sphere of also intelligent people. Like, what is that like coming in? Is it different from any education you've experienced before, or how did Princeton feel?
100%. So I think that like I was grateful that when I was younger at the science Olympiads, I had already met people who were, let's say, they were more like they had more experience and were a lot more like well versed in like science and physics and stuff. So I knew that these people existed. I'd met a lot of them, and funnily enough, some of the people that I'd met at those science Olympiads were at we like met again at Princeton and things like that. So that was kind of cool. And so I think like sometimes college can be this thing where like if you're like the best academics and you're like the quarterback on the football team and you're a small town and you come to college and you're like, wow, like everyone here is all like you lose the things that you used to define yourself by. And I think that for me, going through UWC kind of made me very confident in the fact that like, you know, you don't need to have these like other labels that you define yourself by. You as like a unique individual, the things that you basically don't have to like have these external factors that you like hang your identity on. And so I think that like the whole environment at Princeton, I'm trying to tie this in. So like at UWC, I went through this whole like getting into self-development and spirituality and like I used to share these like motivational posts and things on Facebook and stuff like that. And I kind of continue that into Princeton as well. But then I started to realize that like there's different paths that you're on. And as much as I thought of myself as like an independent thinker at that age, I was still running on a treadmill or running a path that was leading to a certain place, or I felt that like those were the things that were important. So one example is like when you get to college, you need to have a purpose for why you're there. Like why are you there? What do you want to do? For some people, that purpose is, you know, you want to go to med school, you want to go to grad school, they want to go work at a bank or go and, you know, everyone has their own kinds of purposes. And at that time, and I think this happens to so many people, I hadn't really thought about it too much. I was too busy trying to execute and do well so that like you can get into college, such that, you know, once you're there, you now have to try and figure out, okay, what do I want to do here, and what does the next period of my life look like? And I think especially as an international student, it was a difficult question because you kind of have to think about, you know, do you want to stay in the US? Where do you want to like live in the world? That like place aspect is also important. And I think Princeton for me was a time where I had how can I put this? Like I was exploring my strengths and trying to like understand more about myself. But also I realized like the things that I'm pulled towards versus the things that I want to push and be good at. So let me explain what that means. So often we have these things that like we think we should be good at. So I call this like the difference between desired strengths and actual strengths. There's certain things that you want to be good at. Like, oh, look, Dylan is a good podcaster. I want to be a good podcaster like Dylan. But there's other things that like you're actually good at that you think might not be cool, but where your core strengths actually lie. And so for me, that came in technology, where like I wanted to be a good software engineer. I wanted to do well in engineering, but my actual strengths lay in the intersection of engineering and public speaking and like entrepreneurship, for example. So it wasn't just the fact that like I'm a good engineer, but it's how can you like leverage technology as well as like my other strengths of like being having like entrepreneurial tendencies and public speaking and communication, how can you leverage those things? And so I think that like that whole time from like year 1 to year 4, there was like a market shift in how comfortable I was with the things that I wanted to do, and less like striving for trying to do something to prove to other people that like you're good enough at it. So for example, at Princeton, one of the ways this manifests, and I'm sure it's the same at Brown, is people take hard classes just to show that like they're a badass. So for example, there's a notoriously hard class called operating systems. It's about how the computer works. It's a very difficult class. Even among the smart people, like one of my co-founders of the company that I did in my senior year and afterwards, he took this class, and like he's like one of the best people in computer science that I know. And he was like, "Yeah, this class is hard." Like, I'm like, "Yeah, I'm staying away from this. This is not for me." Whereas other things, for example, so you have these people who are like, you hang your identity on being smart, and so you seek out those things that will like reinforce the fact that you're smart, versus trying to keep your identity small and doing the things that like you are curious about and that you actually enjoy. And so by the end of it, like I went from taking classes because I thought they said something about me. Like, you talk about your class, and you're like, "Oh, well, I'm doing this class and this class." And everyone's like, "Wow, you're doing this. That's really cool. Like, you must be so like dedicated and stuff." I went from that to like, I'm taking the things that I want to take, and I don't care what anyone else thinks. I honestly don't. Like, as long as I'm happy, that's the most important thing. And so that shift towards like authenticity is very important. Naval has an amazing line that says, "You want to escape competition through authenticity." And I think that's like a thesis for how to be successful in life. You want to find what is your authentic self. You want to find your unique skills and strengths. And this is why I write about this stuff, because it's something that I feel is so important to being successful and also happy in life. And then you just want to like escape competition. You don't want to be competing with other people. You want to transcend that. And so there's a lot to unpack in those 4 years, but I think that was like the main theme of like finding your strengths and discovering yourself and like being okay with that. And then in my senior year, I started this company, which is something we can get into. But that was like almost like the combination of my time at Princeton. It was so funny. Like, if I was when I was at UWC, if someone told me like, "Hey, you're going to go to the school and you're going to start a company," I was like, "Wow, that sounds like the dream." And it's funny that I've actually done all of that. So a lot of things to be grateful for in life when you look back.
Yeah, I think one, it's interesting because we've talked about it a little bit before, but how I had this experience coming into math. Like, I always identified as good at math, and then I just got my shit rocked the first exam at Brown, and I was like, "All right." Well,
it happens. Yeah.
You realize you're around the cream of the crop, and like, all right, maybe not math, but maybe I'm the best at math, business, and just talking to people. Like, maybe that's my intersection.
Yeah.
So
what did you guys study at Brown, by the way? I never actually asked you this.
I studied BEO, which is business, entrepreneurship, and organizations. So it's
very
kind of
interesting.
Spanish as well.
And interesting, Avthar, for me.
And you, Henry, what did you do?
Yeah, I studied astrophysics. And
yes.
Like you say, I always got that when I say I studied astrophysics, like people's jaws hit the floor.
Yeah.
And it was one of those curricula where like, I think it's because people didn't know it, but it was like, you are doing something so hard. And so,
yeah,
what was weird was I was like, it's not terribly hard. And I just like it. Kind of like you said, I was like, I just do this because I like it.
Right.
They're like, well, what are you going to do with that degree? I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Probably music. Right. Like, and I just don't care. I don't care.
It's such a funny thing to hear people. I don't know who said this back in the day, but like, listen to how people introduce you. It's fascinating. And like, everyone's like, "Yeah, Henry's studying astrophysics." I'm like, "This clown, like, you think he's smart? Look at him."
I know. Like, I barely got out of there, but it was so much of what you're saying, Avthar. It was like, oh, those were the hardest classes at the university. Like, therefore you must be this. It's like, nah.
Yeah, I think like all these things, like if you can try and get away from doing things as a means of signaling and move towards doing things as a means of self-expression, that's like a journey that we're all on in life. I think even to an extent, in entrepreneurship, a lot of people use starting a company as a means of signaling, oh, look at me, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a CEO, I hustle all the time, Gary V, all that kind of stuff. Whereas I think now my take on whether you should start a company and how you should go about doing that is as a means of self-expression, and basically taking this obsession and curiosity and natural skills and leverage that you have, and productizing that and putting that into the world such that like it can help people and it's a problem that you want to solve. Because I think ultimately that's how you win in the long term. And it's kind of like, even when I say it, it feels like light and free, whereas in traditional business it's like cutthroat, and you gotta make returns for your shareholders and you gotta outperform the competition. And to an extent that's there, but like the best companies, they say the best companies are like competition aware but like customer obsessed. And so the more obsessed you can be in like staying in your own lane, you don't have to worry about what other people are doing. The world is big enough such that you don't have to worry about that.
I find that so true, like the world being so big and us being so connected. Even we're discovering now on Twitter, like you just find your niche and you can crush it in that niche. So that weird intersection. What I kind of pose this big question to you, but I have been wrestling with it. And college, like it's beaten into us that, you gotta take the hardest classes. You gotta really push yourself to the brink of failure, even though we're not used to that.
And far past it.
Yeah, and we had Excellent Sheep. That's our favorite book to talk about on this topic. But from your perspective, Avthar, was that a big issue where you saw people not taking the time to really sort of create that internal scorecard that we talk about and like really figure out what is success for you? How am I getting an A in what I actually care about as success, or am I just getting an A in these computer systems classes that don't actually matter for me?
Exactly.
Do you see that as an issue?
100%. So while I was at Princeton, my favorite activity that I did was being a learning consultant. And so what that means is you help other students with things like time management and goal setting. And basically it's like, if a tutor is helping you figure out like how do you integrate and do calculus and like the actual like methods of the subject, we're more like at a high level about like, okay, how can you construct routines and habits and making sure that like you're going in the right direction, and that you have like the information and also the understanding of like where do you want to go and are you happy about like the way that you're getting there and stuff like that. And so it was, I think the term that we use is like personalized academic and like lifestyle strategies. So that was what it's about.
Is Princeton unique in this? Sorry to jump in, but
yeah,
because I haven't heard this. Actually. Brown, we didn't have it. We had like
why don't we have more learning consultants?
Yeah, I think it's really wonderful. It's one of the things that it's like it's very natural to what I used to do, because I would do this anyway, like with my friends. And like I remember when I met the gentleman who runs that center at Princeton, he was like, we just got on like a house on fire. It was amazing. But to your question about like, do people take the time to think about what's important to them? The answer is no. And I don't think it's our fault. And I think maybe I'm interested in you guys because I had such a different background in the sense that like I was taken to these different places and like I kind of had to figure this out for myself. But especially in if you're just like living in the same town, you go to the primary school, then you go to high school, and then you got to go to college, and then after college there's all these like checkpoints that are set up for you, and not nearly enough people think about like what is the reason that you're playing this game, and like why do you want to do this. This is why you see a lot of students coming into college wanting to do things like pre-med, and then they drop out after like organic chemistry or something like that because they don't really want it. They thought they wanted it, but they don't actually want to do it. And so I think that like examining why do you want the things that you want, like are your desires yours or are they influenced by other people? And obviously we're mimetic creatures. We're gonna like want things that other people want, but you want to minimize the extent that that desire is driven by other people and it's more because you like it and you want to do it. And so this idea of like, are you examining why you want to do something? I saw this a lot when I was consulting students, and they would talk about like, oh, I'm doing this really hard class, and I can give you, and they were like, can you help me with it? And I said, look, I can give you tips and strategies for like how to do better in it. But before we get into that, I want to talk about why you're doing this class. Like, what exactly is it contributing to in your life? And they're like, like I never actually thought about that. They would say like, oh, this is a requirement for something, and like a requirement for pre-med. I was like, oh, so why do you want to do pre-med? Tell me about that. And so once you get down this layer of whys, and you get to like the core of what is your actual motivations for something. I think I have in the one of the posts that I wrote about like finding your dream job, I talk about examining your motives and examining your motivations for like why do you want to do something. And I think that that's so powerful because like as much as those motivations can change a little bit, at the end of the day, you have some like core desires that you want to fulfill. And some of these things are unconscious. So for example, some people, when I ask them, why do you want to do pre-med? They would get into this whole story. So a lot of the time it was a kind of like therapy sessions because as much as we're supposed to talk about like learning strategies and like time management and stuff like that, it really gets into like once you understand your motivation and your core why for why you want to do something, everything else becomes easy because you have that foundation of like, okay, if I'm doing this for a good enough reason, then that motivates all the energy that I'm going to put into the different like systems and the changes that I need to make. But if you're unsure at a deeper level about why you want to do something, then that like existential anxiety is going to permeate the things that you're trying to do. And ultimately, you're not doing good at the class because you don't understand the material, is because you're not sure of yourself and you're not sure of like, why you actually are doing this. And I think some people do have these good ideas, but good reasons and good motives. But I think that not nearly enough of us have made the time to think about that. And I think that, like, for example, failure and these things where we go through situations that we might not have wanted. So, for example, like when I went to the science Olympiads, like I did well in the sense that I represented South Africa and we were like the best students in our country. But we didn't do well at the international stage. We actually got like outclassed and outperformed by all these other people, mainly because our curriculum is not that good, but we were just not at that level. And so for me, I could have been like all demoralized and stuff like that. And I was to a certain extent. But then I realized like, hey, like I really like this and this is my motivation for doing it. And so I was used to like at these points of failure or at these like down points in your life, using that as an opportunity to take stock and reflect and say like, okay, why did this happen? Is it a setback or am I actually like playing the wrong game? And if you do find yourself playing the wrong game, then switch, do something else. Like for example, when I was at Princeton, I initially came in as wanting to do aerospace engineering, and it's kind of like astrophysics, where it's one of those things like it's literally rocket science. Like that, and that's like all the jokes about like, oh, like it's not rocket science. This actually is. This is aerospace engineering. And I wanted to do that because I was very inspired by Elon Musk, and he was doing stuff in SpaceX, and he was also from South Africa. So I was like, right, I'm gonna be the South African Indian Elon Musk. That's like what I want to do. And then thankfully, like I got taken off that route by the fact that if you're not a US citizen, you can't actually work in the aerospace sector, say from, I think maybe if you're like from Canada, even Canadians, I know some of my friends had issues with that. But I was saved from that whole route because eventually I would have found out like, why do I want to do this? It's because I want to be like Elon Musk. And like, what's the reason for that? So that I can have, the respect and adoration and the money and be on the cover of Forbes and stuff like that. Is this like the best way to do this? That's like the real question. And also like, why do you want those things as well? Like, why do you want the money? Why do you want the respect? Why do you want, like, is something about yourself that you're not quite comfortable with that you feel like this is going to fulfill? And so these are like the existential questions that I think we all need to grapple with. And I think that like we all approach these like different breaking points. And you even said it yourself, like once you fail your maths exam, you're like, okay, well, maybe this maths thing, if like, for example, there's some people that I know that if they enjoy maths and they're like, yeah, I just like doing it, I don't care if I'm not doing as well as other people in the class, like this is the one thing that I enjoy. Whereas, if you have these other interests and you're like, okay, maybe this is a part of what I want to do, and maybe let's explore these other things that I'm interested in. So yeah, that's like a whole thing. I think we should all make time to reflect and review the game that we're playing in life, because too much of the time you see people quote unquote winning, and then realizing like that's not the game that they wanted to play in the first place. They're not happy with like, whether it's the money or whether it's like the relationship or whether it's, the job or something like that. You see this all the time, people going into banking and going to work at like Facebook and Google and stuff like that. After like a couple of years, they're like, yeah, this is not that lit anymore. Whereas some other people who had better reasons, they're much more aligned. I think alignment is such a key term. It's funny, like I learned this from Veda actually at ALA. He talks about like the whole process of alignment. That's like such a critical theme for just living a happy and effective life as well. So if you can align your actions with your motives, that's it.
That's it. And nobody's taking the time to do that. We just talked to a friend, Ian, who his advice for that is like, take a day, take 6 hours, sit down, get all your electronics away and take a piece of paper and sit down and answer why. Like, why am I doing this? He was like, we spend 3 hours figuring out our Call of Duty class and like the guns we want to use online, but we don't sit down for 30 minutes and figure out why we're like doing something. That should be an entire class.
Exactly.
What's interesting really quick is just how you say, Avthar, with you guys realizing that other countries, they did better than you in the science Olympiads. And you're like, okay, you start to question this route. But often when you're winning or even you're just complacent, like there's no big issue, you're not going to make that change and really start to question some of the deeper questions of why. And I know you like Farnham Street, I assume. I've seen some references there. They have, I think it was Getting to First Principles, an article there, and it's like ask why 5 times and get to the root of the problem. So I think that's awesome. Would you?
One thing before we switch gears, there's one resource that I think is very good for people who are looking for like questions to ask themselves if they want to like basically introspect more about their life. There's 2 wonderful books by these 2 Stanford design thinking professors. One is called Designing Your Life. So they're basically applying these principles of introspection and testing and design to how do you live a fulfilled life, both in terms of your personal life as well as your work life. And then there's another book that they came out with that's just specifically about career called Designing Your Work Life. I'd recommend both of them. I think that's a great place to start.
Is it a duo, the authors?
Yeah.
I think I know.
Design school professors.
I was there for a parent weekend. My sister's was a freshman there.
Nice.
And I got to sit on a lecture with them.
Yeah, it's a class that they taught and they
had us kind of go through this exercise.
Yeah.
And I remember at one point, we were, as a full room of like parents, we were kind of coming up with solutions to get back some of our lifetime.
Yeah.
I remember I grabbed the microphone and I said, like, I'm spending too much time on email and I'm going to delete it from my phone. And the parents were like, that's cool. The point was like the parents in the room were like, oh my gosh, you can do that. And it was interesting for me. So I do want to read that book. But yeah, it was funny that everyone in the room, like that was such a foreign thing for them that you could kind of get rid of.
Exactly.
They were an older demographic, but
reality is all the assumptions of reality. You can question them.
There you go.
Is negotiable. Yeah.
It's beautiful now because that message is starting to propagate, and you're not in your little your chambers, your silos of ways of thinking, especially geographically now. You have Twitter where people are saying these things like crazy, so you can hear and read books on it. Would you then say and this is kind of the question I posed, but Avthar, say you have an 18-year-old, very fresh, impressionable, maybe you give them a class like Design Your Life or something like that first thing, then from there, like I kind of want to leave it open from first principles. That's the idea, is it doesn't have to be like a college environment.
Yeah.
But would you consider maybe like, oh, you just send them to another country, a random country with a bunch of people for a year and like have that? I
remember, I do think that like that whole experience of going away. So there's this concept, I'm sure you guys know about this, called the hero's journey, where the hero faces some sort of like things are going well in their life, and then they face some sort of tragedy, and then they have to go away. In Hindu mythology, this is often represented as people going into the forest where they find themselves and they confront the demons, and then they come back to their kingdom, and then they beat the boss, and then they're the king again. Or they were the prince and then now they're the king. And so I think that like that whole aspect of leaving your home and leaving your comfort zone and all that stuff. That's super critical, because I think that's like that teaches people self-reliance and gives them more independence than they otherwise would have developed in your own environments. Because ultimately, like if you can detach yourself from, because especially in the American context, there's so many of these like stereotypes and archetypes. You have your jock, you have your nerd, you have the cheerleaders, you have these people, you have the people who are into spelling and stuff like that. If you can remove yourself from that environment where all these labels were previously on you, and you now have an opportunity to reinvent yourself in an environment where no one knows who you are, no one knows what you did before, all those labels are now no longer attached to you, you can actually be free and reinvent the life that you want to live. That's so critical. And I think there's no better means of doing this than moving to a different place. This could be a different country, it could be a different state if you're like in the States. But I do think that experience, like the UWC experience of like taking you out of your home country and into a foreign country, that is a surefire catalyst for growth. Like that's definitely would be on the list.
Is there a way you can think of to do that at a smaller scale for maybe the folks that are on route to go to a community college, and they're commuting from home? How do you get that same kind of experience of that hero's journey, but you're still at home at 19 years old? I'm sorry to put you on the spot. I don't know if you have to...
No, it's a difficult question, because I think that, like, again, it's all about, I'm a believer of this principle of finding your own way. And so for me, like the UWC was like my way of doing it. For other people, it means, moving to a different city, or maybe testing out something that they, or taking time away from like the path that they were going to walk in life, and like stopping. It may mean like taking a gap year for some people. I do think travel is like a very like when a lot of people think about like, oh, I want to travel, it means like, oh, let's go and like go through to Europe and backpack and stuff like that. But I do think like service is a good way to do it. That would be like one of the ways that I think is almost universally accessible, where everyone is always looking for volunteers. Everyone is always, I think there's these programs that like if you volunteer for a year, they'll give you housing and stuff like that. And that's a great way to see different parts of the world, but also to contribute and to help and to give. And so I think that would be one of my recommendations, is like take some time, volunteer at a place for like a month or a certain amount of time. And basically like you want to stop the momentum of your life such that you can re-evaluate whether that direction that you're going is actually the right one.
We had, I specifically, Dylan, you know him, but we knew somebody who, like that junior year, your critical internship, he went to Hawaii to volunteer on a coffee farm, and he was sleeping in the farm, camping, and they would feed him, and obviously they gave him that housing. And that was like, he was pre-law. It's just like such a good way to get away. I think within certain bounds, like anybody could do that.
I think especially like with service, and again, like obviously everyone's situation is going to be unique to them, but I think that like in addition to some sort of journey that you can take, some sort of taking yourself out of your current environment, as you were saying, Dylan, the other thing I would say is like try and find and start questioning your natural strengths and try and find your gifts in life. And I think that like that whole process of reflection, and then probably have them do this thing called the reflected best self, where they try and build this 360 picture of when they are at their best from the different people that they've worked with in their life. That would be a starting point. And then from there, nurturing and trying to guide their own curiosities. I think that like the ideal college experience, or the ideal like educative experience, isn't so much a matter of instruction, but a matter of guidance and facilitation, if that makes sense. So it's not about giving them, I'm not going to teach them anything, but it's more about helping them tap into and learning to recognize and follow their own curiosity and the things that are already in their own mind and stuff like that. It's a difficult question. I think that like this whole matter, and it's funny that you brought this up because this is actually a question that I think is one of my 12 like favorite questions in life. And I think that like education, well, the first company that I started was education nonprofit. Actually, when I was at Princeton, we were teaching young women in South Africa computer science, so programming, and also teaching them optimal learning techniques. So these like ways that you can essentially learn things faster and like have these learning techniques that you can apply not just to computer science and programming, but to other subjects that they had in school. And so that would be another thing, like learning how to learn, like all these meta principles about like finding your strengths, learning how to learn anything. Public speaking and communication would probably be another thing. I think that like, and this is what brought it home for me, your ability to do things in the world is limited by your ability to articulate them in your own head. If you can't describe something to another person, it almost doesn't exist in a way.
Yeah.
Like it almost like it's there, but if you can't, and that's a beautiful thing in some ways, but in terms of like practical stuff, this is why like selling and pitching in entrepreneurship is very important, because if you can't paint a picture to another person, it's very difficult for them to understand where you're coming from. And the people who can more closely articulate where their words are matching the things that they want to say and their feelings, those are the people that I think are the best communicators. And again, for me, this happened by like, I don't know, accident, but like I used to do debating and public speaking. There's a funny story where like I was in primary school and I used to argue with my teachers all the time. This is the one thing I was notorious for. I was a good student, but I was also like a disruptive student. Like I used to get bored and I'll start talking to my classmates and argue with the teachers, because the one teacher would be like, "Oh, you can't use this pen." I'm like, "But why? Why can't we use a blue pen? Why do we have to use a black pen?" And so then she basically told me that, "Yo, this is my classroom. If you want to debate, go and join a debating club." And so when I went to high school,
Like,
I was like, "This
all right.
debating club." I'm like, "This is my place. Like this is a place for me." But I think that whole thing about communication, and whether it's like written or spoken or I don't know, I think like that's super important. And then, but basically what I was saying is that this whole idea of like education, I think, is a problem that I want to tackle perhaps later in life once I have my own capital to play around with. Because one thing I found doing this education nonprofit is that most of the time being a nonprofit CEO or nonprofit head is just like grant writing and applying for funding. And I was like, this process would be a lot easier if I just had my own money. You don't have to spend the time writing grants, and I can do whatever I want with it, and I can test it in the way that I want. And so I think that that's in maybe 20 years or so, I might be doing that. Who knows? We'll see. But I think now that whole idea of like nurturing kids' natural curiosity. So there's the guy that I like a lot. His name is Josh Waitskin. He is
I was about to mention him when you were done talking too. So.
Oh, nice. Yeah, but he has this whole idea of like, you want to cultivate the ability to listen to your internal music, and children are naturally curious and they naturally want to learn things, and each person will gravitate towards different things. And the more you can not block them in that process, and the more you can help them, because a lot of people are like, at a young age, they might be interested in something, and then their parents or their friends or something might say, like this dance thing is silly, or this other thing is silly. Like you should be focused on practical things. And I think that like there's a means of like taking this natural curiosity and just letting it flow and like guiding it along the way. That I think is one of the ideal like themes for education, and like how you do that is another question.
A monster.
I'm realizing that we might need just a podcast on like redesigning education.
Let's go for it
as a whole.
I have on my because I was talking with my girlfriend about it this weekend. My whiteboard right now in my bedroom says "Make EDU better." Like,
yeah,
it's just like the whole thing's got to be reworked.
$1 trillion problem. $1 trillion problem.
At least. At least.
Especially now they're losing their minds.
Yeah. And I think that like the whole coronavirus has also made people question the value of certain things. So, for example, like, and this is a whole topic that we can get into, because at one point I was super interested in it, and then I realized, as a college student, there's no money in education, in the sense that, like, the way for me to go about this is to, like, live my life. Don't live my life, is to, like, accrue capital through the entrepreneurial endeavors that I'm going to do, and, like, those are going to be means of self-expression. They're going to be helping people, stuff like that. And then once I have that capital, then I can come back and say, okay, now that I have these resources, let's think about how do we attack these other problems, like education, like probably education is the biggest one for me. Maybe health and fitness is another one for me, because I think that, like, the other things, like, if you were just to say, okay, where I am right now, of course you can make a change where you are right now, but it's going to be constrained by those who have capital in the world. And this is where one of the dudes that I know we all like is Chamath Palihapitiya. He is
it's literally
CEO
like
of Capital.
I was like, is he going to mention Chamath? Avthar,
Yeah,
come on. There it is.
Yeah, and so his whole thing, like, money is the instrument for change.
You got to get a room.
Yeah, yeah, no. But again, there's so many different concepts. There's the MOOCs. Now people are doing remote learning, and I think remote is definitely scalable in terms of the fact that, like,
it's scalable, sure, but kids need physical play.
Correct. Exactly. That's the
we
issue.
should do a whole podcast.
Yeah, no, that's exactly
education.
Well, yeah, this question, I'm realizing we only got to about age 2021, so there's still many years to cover. And
then there's also the question of, like, most education is focused on kids, but most of the time people are having, like, midlife crises. And
why aren't we educating 40-year-olds?
Yeah, it's like, how do you take these things and this is where the money is, in my opinion. This is where I think the money is. And there's a couple of people doing things well here. One of the people, Ramit, is probably an example of this, where, he's educating people about finances and productivity and stuff like that. And it's targeted at a demographic that can afford it, top performers in his words. And there's also people like Tiago Forte, who does the, building a second brain and the information organization stuff. And then David Perel is doing his writing school. And there's tons of other people doing different things, like online courses and stuff like that. Is just like the latest latest manifestation of this, before there's MOOCs and stuff like that. There's actually a great, what is it? Like a video. It's not a lecture. It's just this guy talking, Tiago Forte, talking about the history of online education. I should actually rewatch it this week. See, now you guys have got me all excited about this education thing, because this is the thing with me. I get all excited about this stuff, and then I realize. So I'm actually on a week off this week. My boss has instituted, we can tell by the mandatory. Yeah, exactly. If I can't be in Thailand, then I got to dress like I'm in Thailand. So my boss instituted this mandatory week off, and I had this thing, this list of reflection questions, and again, taking that time in your day where I just want a whole day where I'm not going to be on Twitter. I'm not going to be on sitting at my desk. Obviously, that day is not today, because I'm here doing the podcast with you guys. And actually just taking stock of where I'm in life and stuff like that. But now I'm so excited because, like, about this education thing. I want to go and research, and I want to go
next week.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, it could be. It could be this week too. But there's always so much, and I know you. Maybe there's like a podcast for each one of those 12 questions you have too, that are more
for sure. Yeah, those are lifelong questions. Just whole books and things that can be. And I think that's what's wonderful, is that, like, there's so much depth that you can get into.
Right. So we'll figure out a time for that after this, because this gets me excited too. I do think I actually watched a video. I don't know if it was Stanford or maybe it was Stanford. It was like their design school. They had to rethink college education completely. And they're like, what if we just took these 4 years, but said you could use them at any point in your life? Yeah. Like maybe you want to use a year when you're 42, and then another one when you're 58. And
like, one thing that I liked is thinking. What is the word? Moving up a level from, like, what you're talking about. I think this whole principle, like, one of the things that I liked in college was design thinking, and I know it's like kind of vogue right now, but one of the things that I naturally gravitated towards is that this idea of, like, okay, in the design thinking process, you think about, okay, you have a problem. What are, like, the assumptions, and how can you challenge them? And, like, that's such a wonderful example of, like, oh, we think that college needs to be 4 years at 18, from 18 to 22, or however old you are. What if that wasn't the
Why?
case? Yeah, exactly.
Why?
Why
It's
is
just
that true?
arbitrary. Like they're
Exactly.
kind of young. Whatever. Yeah,
Sorry,
I want
go
to.
ahead.
Well, I struggle to. I know I said like trying to design from first principles and stuff. It's hard to really maybe have that as a mental model and really internalize that whole approach.
Yeah.
I guess you just have to ask a lot of whys. There are probably more articles, but it is so fundamental. And I was trying to rethink college, but I never thought about the lifespan. Like you can change when you use those years. There's so many different ways to break it down that you just never.
And the notion that when you're 55, you've still got 20 years of productivity left. Like, why is that the end of your career and your education?
Exactly. Yeah.
You should go do
ahead.
another 4 years of college at 55.
And this is another thing where I'm like, one of the
It'd be
reasons
lit.
why. I'll go ahead. Yeah, it would be lit actually. Yeah, I wish I could do a college now. Like once you have, so there's certain things that stress you out in college, right? There's like, what am I going to do in the future? What are my finances? Stuff like that. Once you've answered those questions, college is lit. Like I know my host family, they're a group. They're like in their 70s, I think. So as an international student, I was paired with a local family in Princeton. They're most wonderful, amazing people. Consider them like my grandparents and stuff like that. They actually go and sit in on lectures in Princeton. They just because they're retired. That's their day, and they love it. And like the fact that when you remove the stress of college and you can just enjoy the learning is wonderful. It's a great time. So yeah, and this is another reason why I think like health and fitness is very important, because the healthier you can be, and if you can increase your health span, like the time of in your life that you can like be healthy and functional, life, while it's very short and it's very fleeting, there's a lot of time to do things. Like if you imagine, we're, I don't know, 25, 26 right now. You're going to have 3 more of your lives in the future. Like imagine what can you do with that?
And like adult life,
full adult life, right?
Exactly.
Not
adult life,
age
we're only
6.
a couple of years in, and you got 30 more of those. So.
Exactly. So
well, Avthar, you have I have to run in a minute, but I think you have successfully brought us to a point where we can book you for another episode.
Dude, let's get it
because we're
done.
only at age like 21 right now, and we've uncovered the major untruth of the world that is education.
This was great. Yeah, a lot of fun.
Dylan, any like final thoughts here?
There are a lot of final thoughts, but we're gonna cut them off.
Today.
That was what I was gonna mention with Josh Waitskin. Is that how I say his name? I've never
Yeah, Josh Waitskin. Yeah.
And he's like, all right, always end on a good note so you're excited the next time. I mean, I think we could do that a million times.
End it with quality. Yeah, let's do it.
I love it. So we'll touch base. You'll be hearing from us again. Any final words for you, Avthar, or anything you want to plug? We'll mention your websites as usual. But.
Yeah, no, I write I'm in the process of documenting the things that I'm learning and the lessons that I've learned in life. I write a weekly newsletter. You can check it out at avthar.email, avthar.email, or on my website, avthar.com. Everything is there.
Did you? Yeah. How do you get .email? That's so sick.
I bought it. You just Namecheap. I think domain names. So when I started my company, getting the right domain names are very important. I think I bought, and I think once you're working, you can spend like maybe like $100 and you can buy like 6 or 7 domain names. I think I've got like avthar.health, avthar podcast, like all sorts of things just around my name, things that I might want to do in the future. I'm like, yeah, I might as well buy it now because it's very cheap. Like I think I bought my name, avthar.com. It was like $2 or something like that. So yeah,
definitely investing in domain names. We slip in at the end. That's awesome, Avthar. Thanks again. Appreciate everyone being on, and we'll see you next time.
Awesome.
Peace.
Awesome.
Okay, that was dope. Avthar. Oh man. Every time we get into
talking to you guys, man. It's great talking to you
next week.
Yeah, literally.
There's too much here.
Honestly, if you want to make this weekly,
in the same room.
I'd be down to commit to like a weekly thing, just where we just talk, the 3 of us.
Just riff, and
it'll be great. We could do it on like a Saturday morning or something like that.
I'm losing my spot.
No, dude. The problem is I have a job. Okay, I don't have time to get on every day. So once a week is something I can commit to. I think once a week is like a good with everything else going on in my life.
That'd be cool. But you also have your. I mean, How often do you film your podcasts, and when you want to launch those? Isn't that?
So I'm probably also going to do that once a week as well, weekly.
I'm
I'm trying to
have 10
batch
things that are once a week.
Yeah, dude, every day is going to be a different day. No, but what I'm trying to do is batch record them. So I'll probably do like, so I already have 3. I'm actually recording one with my friend at 6 p.m. tonight. And then depending on later this week, I'm trying to understand what direction I want to take that in terms of like, what are my internal scorecard for the podcast and newsletter. Once I've clarified that a little bit.
To ask you.
We can talk about that next time. Yeah, next time. Once I've clarified a little bit more about that, then I'm going to start scheduling guests. Because I have like this vision of like these people I want to reach out to, but I want to make sure that I've got the positioning and what I want to do with it first. But yeah, batch recording is a thing for me. I'll probably record like 3 or 4 in one day or over a weekend, and then use that for the next month, and then
smart.
do that again.
Saturday.
And you come on this one, we'll repurpose it for you. You don't even have to plug in.
Yeah, it's going to be lit. I'm excited, man. It's great. It's great talking to you guys. Yeah.
Well, I know Belky. Well, you got to leave in a second, Belky. But
yes,
normally the weekends are tough. We'll figure out scheduling, or we just cut you out completely because
weekends. Not in the next 2 weeks.
Friday afternoon, evening might be good.
Okay. Well, dope. Thanks again.
Cool.
We'll talk in text and we'll catch y'all.
Take care, guys. Have a good rest of your